Welcome to the Martin Bailey Photography Podcast. It's February 17, 2024, and this is episode 834. Wow, that was the longest period I've gone without a post since at least 12 years ago, possibly the longest period since I started the podcast back in September 2005. My apologies for the hiatus, although I can assure you it was not simply me being lazy. I'll explain as briefly as possible, but as you know, I have 3 Japan tours that I run each winter, with the first being what I call the Hokkaido Winter Landscape Adventure, which starts towards the end of the first week in January each year. I'm going to update you on that trip shortly. Now, the cool thing is, as I mentioned in a brief post before my top 10 post for 2023, I bought a drone, a DJI Air 3, as I wanted to create a video to share the beautiful locations that we visited during my Hokkaido landscape tour with you. And during the 9 days that I was back at home after that trip, I spent time pretty much completing the editing of my video and got started on creating the background music. But I got set back a little by spending some time looking into a new server for my various websites. One takeaway from that was that I'd like to warn you, if you don't already know about this, but when you look at reviews to find the best server provider, you'll almost invariably see Bluehost come out on top. They were less than half the price of the dedicated server that I've used for several years now. But I was looking at VPS, or Virtual Private Server, in a bid to bring costs down. Technology has moved on since I got my Dedi, and you don't really need the power that I was paying for to serve websites up quickly these days. There was also a problem that I was trying to circumvent, which was that I was being forced to migrate my CentOS server to an Alma Linux server because CentOS is being EOL'd, and there were some critical components that I used that did not have a version compatible with Alma Linux, so they were blocking my migration, which had to be completed within the next few months. Then, though, when I logged into my new Bluehost server, I was amazed to not only be presented with the same migration warning, but their implementation was blocked just like my old server. It was brand new. So I asked if they could provide me with an Alma Linux server out of the box, and they did not have a solution. And at this point, that's just lazy on their part. So I requested a refund. And this took them almost 3 weeks to process. I was appalled by the quality of their support and product, and feel that they must be paying a lot of money to reviewers to get their name on the top of all the best provider lists. Whatever quality Bluehost once boasted about, is no longer an attribute that they can claim to own. And that little excursion cost me another full day. At that point, I had to prepare to leave for the first of my 2 winter wildlife tours, which went great. I got back from that trip a week ago yesterday, and I tried again for a few days to complete the video and get it published. It's almost ready, but then the refund from Bluehost finally came through, and I was pulled back into my server migration project because this has to be done soon. And I felt that I could fit it in during the pockets of downtime. Then, as is always the case, once I got started I couldn't stop, and then my main server went down as I made some changes, so it was all or nothing, and that took the best side of 2 full days to complete. My server is now running nicely in an inexpensive RackNerd VPS, and I am sitting here writing out a transcript for this episode that you're currently listening to or reading via WordPress on my new server. Phew, what a month it's been, and I didn't even get started on my accounting work this week. So with the video coming up at some point, which includes some lovely comments from my wonderful guests on the landscape tour, I have selected several key photos from the trip to share with you today. I'm going to try to not go too crazy about talking about what the drone enabled me to do, but there are some shots that are simply not possible without a drone, and I couldn't resist including them in this roundup. We started our trip with our first 3 days photographing the beautiful hills and trees around BA. At dawn, we took a brief walk to the waterfall behind our hotel and were treated with some lovely colour in the sky as the sun reached the horizon behind the distant mountains. I had my drone out videoing the group in this special environment, and I couldn't resist taking a moment to make this photograph from above the bridge on which we were standing. The DJI Air 3 has 2 cameras, a wide angle and a mid telephoto focal length camera. This was shot with the wide angle camera, and the quality is pretty amazing for such a small sensor. Of course, it's bigger than most smartphone cameras, and they give great quality too, so I shouldn't be surprised, but the images are sharp and very clear and have amazing details. Of course, they're not quite as good as my Canon EOS R5 images, but at 48 megapixels with the processing that DJI must do with their RAW files, it certainly gives the R5 a run for its money. After breakfast, we went to the BA area where they have some of those beautiful rolling hills, and I love shooting the lone trees that are situated perfectly near the top of the hills, so we can capture them with that subtle line between the snow and the sky. This kind of image relies on us getting an overcast sky and hopefully some falling snow, so it's always nice when the conditions change in our favour. This next image shows the other side of the same hill with a copse running up the hill and again leading to a subtle line between the sky and the snow. There's always something hugely satisfying in getting this kind of minimalist shot. As usual, we also made our excursion to the ski slopes on Mount Asahi, where we photographed scenes like this from the edge of the slope while being careful not to get in the way of skiers tearing down the mountain. This is the same shot that I shoot every year, but I do like this scene. I could share scores of similar images, and it's tempting to do so because I love this work so much, but we'll move on to the coast, where we spend some time on a snow-covered beach photographing these tetrapods as the waves crashed around them and the seawater left beautiful patterns as it washed close to our feet. I pretty much always use a tripod when shooting landscapes, as I enjoy how it helps me to fine-tune my composition, and because I generally use somewhat slow exposures, such as 1.3 seconds for this shot, I often use a 2-second timer so that I can get my hand away from the camera during the exposure. For images like this though, where the timing has to be spot on, I use a wired shutter release or a remote timer. Trying to time pressing your shutter button to catch a wave that will reach the optimal height 2 seconds into the future is more difficult than it may sound, but it's simply a case of paying attention and pressing the cable release shutter button if you take a moment to hook one up. Again, I have loads of shots from this beach that I'd like to share, but I'll resist so that we can press on, with this next image of a Shinto gate with a nasty sky and great waves that came up high enough to cover the concrete base of the gate. I gave the top half of the sky a bit more contrast with a Luma mask in Capture One that enabled me to darken the dark areas without adjusting the lighter areas. I included time to visit this location several times during our stay, and as is often the case, the best shots came from the third visit. If we waited until that time to save time on the previous visits, you can bet your bottom dollar that it would be the previous visits that would have provided what we wanted. If you want the results, you have to put in the work. Every year, I'm relieved to find that my boat graveyard is still there. And this year was more of a relief than before because they were working clearing away some of the more derelict buildings there when we visited last year. This spot is one of my favourite places to photograph on the planet, especially when we get some heavy skies and falling snow to make images like this one. Once again, the drone helped me to get a very different perspective in this shot from directly over the line of boats that I've photographed over the years. I love the patterns that the wind-driven snow has created here, telling a story of the relentless winter weather these boats endure. As we rounded the northernmost tip of Japan, we spent some time in a harbour where the weather turned on us. One moment it was calm and the next a squall blew through, and it was so strong it was a little scary. Not so scary that it stopped me setting my tripod down again for a few more shots as I made my way back to our bus. This is one of my favourites. I love the mood and the atmosphere in the photograph. I left this in colour as I like the red hulls of the boats, but I think I'll play with a black and white version later as well when I come up for air after my third tour starting this weekend. We continued on our journey and photographed a little inland from the coast on the east side of Hokkaido, as you can see in this image, with a dark tree in the foreground and a stream leading us to the more distant trees. Once again, the snow and grey sky makes this kind of image. Although shot from eye level, this next image of the fishing port at our final location was also shot with the drone. I kind of like the natural vignette that you get, and the cinematic 16:9 crop is always a pleasure to work with. This final image is something that I would never have thought of shooting if it wasn't for actually getting up there above the port and seeing what it looks like. The drone opens up so many doors. Of course, the video footage is stunning, and I'm looking forward to sharing my video with you. But the still photography opportunities are so much more fun and beautiful than I expected. Okay, so that was 2 more images than my usual 10, but I wanted to share all of the key locations and shots. And although I have many more that I'd love to share, I'll leave it there. I finished this manuscript yesterday on Friday evening, and I'm recording on Saturday before leaving for Hokkaido for my second wildlife trip and my third winter tour of this season. I hope we have as much fun as we did on the first 2 tours. I'll be back at the beginning of March, probably starting with my landscape tour video, and then I'll go on to walk you through the best of my 2 wildlife tours. If you think you might like to join us on the 2025 landscape tour or the wildlife tours, please check availability on my tours page, and I'll see you on the flip side. Thanks very much for listening today. If you enjoy this podcast, please consider supporting us on Patreon, which comes with various benefits depending on your contribution, from basic support and access to the MBP community forum to full-blown photography mentorships. For further details, check out our Patreon page at mbp.ac/Patreon. You can find me on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, X and LinkedIn, and Threads, and links to everything that I'm up to are at martinbaileyphotography.com, so do drop by and take a look. I'll be back in 2 to 3 weeks' time with another episode, but in the meantime, you take care and have a great week, whatever you're doing. Bye-bye.